May we be seated?
Thank you.
Order, honorable members. Order. Today we have only one item on the agenda, and that will be the introduction of the appropriation bill, introduction of public sector pensions and related payments bill, introduction of Eskom debt relief, and introduction of revenue laws bill. I will now ask the secretary to read the first order.
Introduction, appropriation bill and tabling of division of revenue bill. Introduction, public sector pension and related payment bill. Introduction, Eskom debt relief amendment bill. Introduction, revenue laws amendment bill.
Thank you, Honorable the Minister of Finance.
Order, Speaker. On a point of order, Speaker.
Order, Honorable Member. I will ask the Minister to take a seat first. There are two members. Honorable Mauta, there's the first member who raised his hand is Honorable Manye. I'll recognize you after him. Thank you. Honorable Manye, what's the point of order?
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, for us as the MK Party, we are asking purely based on the values of Ubuntu that on the 19th of February we're here to listen to the budget speech, which didn't happen. We think that the minister will be within the values and the realm of Ubuntu for him to apologize to this House for making us come here for nothing, and must also apologize to the people of South Africa, which we represent here, that that day did not happen. So we're asking that that apology must happen. And also, Speaker, we also want to ask the minister to take this House into his confidence to say what exactly caused him not to table the budget speech on the 19th. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Mauta. Minister, you can take your seat. Minister, you can take your seat. I'll recognize the EFF. Yes,
Thank
Honorable
you,
Member.
Speaker. Speaker, I was looking at the time when you sat on that chair. It was exactly 3 minutes past 2. The House sitting is scheduled to start at 2. So, Speaker, you were late. All of us were here. The honorable thing for you to have done was to apologize for coming late and explain why you actually came late. So please, we request you to apologize for coming late and tell the country why you arrived late in this sitting that you have called yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, honorable members. We have noted both your requests as well as your comments. I want to remind honorable members that during the sitting on the 19th, which never proceeded to be the sitting, we gave an opportunities for parties to express themselves. Members of the executive were here, the leader of government business were here, and I'm sure the minister in presenting the budget have noted the concerns that have been raised then and have noted the concerns as they have been raised now. And I will leave it to the minister to then deal with the matter. Secondly, Honorable Maudwe, indeed, we start at 2. Oh, yes, sir? Okay, can you allow me to assist the minister? Well, let's not do what we usually not do in this House. We have decorum, we respect one another, and we allow the speaker to do what she has to do. Indeed, we're supposed to start at 3. We started. Okay. On Wednesdays, we usually start at 3, but today, because of the presentation of the budget, we started 2. We do apologize because there were a bit of, people here on the aisle, which the Sergeant at Arms was trying to remove. I was here before 2 p.m. But we do apologize that we did not start exactly on the time as you requested. And all of us know that last time we had a not so kind dress rehearsal for a budget which will now be presented, but we are now asking the Minister of Finance.
Honorable Speaker, I'll probably assure Khila that I'm going to come back to that issue later. It's taken. Honorable Speaker, Togo Didiza, Deputy Speaker, Anneli Lotrit, Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, Refulum Ntsweni Tsipane, Deputy Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, Les Governor, His Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, Honorable Deputy President Paul Mashatile, Cabinet colleagues, members of the Executive Council for Finance, honorable members, Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, Commissioner of the South African Revenue Service, fellow South Africans. Just before, okay, we'll come back to that point, Khila. I have the honor to table the following documents before this House. The 2025 Division of Revenue Bill, the 2025 Appropriation Bill, the 2025 Eskom Debt Relief Amendment Bill, the 2025 Public Sector Pension and Related Payments Bill, the 2025 Revenue Laws Amendment Bill, the 2025 Estimate of National Expenditure, the 2025 Budget Review, and this 2025 Budget Speech. Just on a lighter note, Madam Speaker, let me first, before going on that lighter note, take the point raised by Honorable Manyi. And indeed, it was an inconvenience for this Parliament and the people of South Africa. And indeed, we owe this Parliament an apology. And we owe the people of South Africa an apology. No doubt about that. We didn't like the postponement. But on a lighter note, I saw on social media something that said this budget is postponed until my favorite club wins. That is Kaizer Chiefs. In cabinet, when I made this point, Dr. Ramkhopa wrote me a piece of note and said, "Yo, this budget will never be tabled." And Honorable Gigawa said, "Hey, these people are putting the country in crisis because this budget will never be tabled." Now, let me go back to the postponement, as I've apologized. Go back to the postponement and say the postponement of the tabling of the budget 3 weeks ago was a regrettable, but perhaps an understandable feature of multi-party governance. It is also a sign of some of the difficulties associated with a multi-party democracy. But what is positive is that the delay has stimulated an unprecedented level of public debate about the difficult policy trade-offs we as a nation face. A vital debate about which policies to fund and how to fund them, about which priorities to pursue now and which ones we may need to delay in the context of unlimited resources. As much as the debate has been dominated by the proposed increase to value-added tax, the bigger debate must be about how we grow the economy for the benefit of all South Africans. A bigger, faster growing economy and the larger fiscal resources that comes with it would give us more fiscal room to meet more of our developmental goals. But the truth is that our economy has stagnated for over a decade. In that time, GDP growth has averaged less than 2%, far below the level required to meet our expanding list of needs. In 2024, the economy grew by only 0.6%. Over the medium term, GDP growth is projected to average 1.8%. To meet our goals of redistribution, redress, and structural transformation, the economy needs to grow much faster and in an inclusive manner. This is the central objective of the current administration. Today's and pragmatic approach to achieve this formidable task. It calls for macroeconomic stability supported by sound fiscal policy, for the deepening of structural reforms to remove the obstacles to growth and job creation, and for scaling up infrastructure to unlock the productive capacity of the economy while building a capable state that supports all these efforts. The budget remains committed to a balanced fiscal strategy. As projected in the 2024 medium-term budget policy statement, a budget primary surplus of 0.5% of GDP will be achieved in the 2025, and this will grow to 0.9% in 25-26. Government debt will stabilize at 76.2% of GDP in 25-26, while the consolidated budget deficit also narrows to 3.5% by 27-28. Madam Speaker, as debt stabilizes, a growing surplus will enable the government to reduce debt service cost as a proportion of revenue. Some of these savings will be used to build up fiscal buffers that we need as protection against future economic shocks. Shocks like the COVID-19 pandemic and other uncertainties stemming from the rising geopolitical tensions and the global economic ramifications thereof. Debt service costs will amount to 389.6 billion in the current financial year. This translates to 22 cents of every rand we raise in revenue. It is more than what we spend on health, the police, or basic education. We must reverse this trend and prevent the cost of debt from taking away resources that could otherwise be spent on our pressing social needs or to invest in growth. In this regard, our fiscal strategy stabilizes debt service cost as a percentage of revenue in 24-25 by maintaining a primary budget surplus. The Eskom debt relief arrangements are also effective and contribute to improved fiscal position. Eskom is now in a much better fiscal position than in 2023 when the debt relief was originally announced. As a result of these improvements, we have decided to simplify the final phase of the debt relief package. The last 70 billion debt takeover will now be replaced with a 40 billion in 2025-26, 10 billion in 28-29. This will result in a saving for the government of about 20 billion rand. Honorable members, these fiscal improvements are important milestones on our path to fostering a stable macroeconomic environment. That is a prerequisite for a higher level of growth that promotes job creation, improve public services, and reduce inequalities. Our strategy to achieve faster growth remains anchored in the following 4 pillars: maintaining macroeconomic stability, implementing structural reforms, improving state capacity, and accelerating infrastructure investment. Maintaining macroeconomic stability, inclusive of prudent fiscal policy, promotes stable prices, lowers interest rates, and enhances the country's resilience to external shocks. This creates a conducive environment for investment. Implementing structural reforms removes impediments to growth and creates a solid foundation for a higher and sustained economic growth. Madam Speaker, it was out of this realization that economic growth and fiscal stability are mutually reinforcing that Operation Vulindlela was formed as a joint venture between Treasury and the Presidency to fast-track the implementation of the structural reforms. Its objective were to stabilize the supply of electricity, create a competitive and efficient freight logistics system, reduce the cost and improve the equality of digital communication, ensure a stable quality supply of water, reform the visa regime to facilitate skilled immigration and support tourism. Since its establishment in 2020, Operation Vulindlela has made real progress in achieving these objectives. For example, the energy reforms have created 22,500 megawatts pipelines of projects. More than 10,000 megawatts are formally registered with NASA, which is of the last step in the regulatory process. These projects will contribute to reducing power cuts. The freight logistic roadmap was approved. The roadmap allows private sector participation and gives third-party access to any operator without discrimination in accordance with the network statement. The cost of 1.5 gigabyte data bundle has declined by 51%, allowing individuals and small businesses to access more affordable data. The water use license backlog has been cleared, unlocking billions in investment and freeing projects that had stalled because of the backlog. The water quality regulatory system was reinstated for the first time since 2014. This is the green drop, blue drop, and no drop certification that enables effective intervention in supporting failing municipalities to provide clean water to citizens. E-visas for travelers from 34 countries have been introduced to significantly boost tourism. The Trusted Employer Scheme has been established to fast-track visa process for major investors. These achievements have eased economic bottlenecks and built on the successes. So phase 2 of OV will focus on the following: through existing reforms in energy, water, logistic, and visa system. Strengthen local government in improving the delivery of basic services. Harnessing digital public infrastructure as a driver of growth and inclusion. And creating sufficient productive and inclusive cities. Madam Speaker, infrastructure is a key pillar of our growth strategy. It is the bedrock for economic development, a key source of jobs, and an avenue for scaling up service delivery. This budget reflects that understanding. Allocation towards capital payments are the fastest growing area of spending by economic classification. Public infrastructure spending over the next 3 years will amount to more than 1 trillion rand. The spending will focus on 3 sectors: 402 billion rand for transport and logistics, 219 billion for energy infrastructure, 156 billion rand for water and sanitation. In transport, the South African National Roads Agency will spend 100 billion rand over the medium term to keep the national road network in good condition. Provincial roads departments will reseal over 16,000 lane kilometers of roads in their areas of authority. Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa is making steady progress to rebuild the infrastructure to provide affordable commuter rail services. To sustain this progress, we have provisionally allocated an additional 19.2 billion over the medium term for critical signaling. This will enable commuters from areas such as Mamelodi, Wamashu, Motherwell, Khayelitsha, Naledi, to name but a few, to catch a train every 10 minutes. To get to and from work and significantly reduce the money that lower income households spend on transport. Let me pause and show an example. Let me pause. The World Bank has produced a report. People tend to be selective when they read the right report. They don't read what they don't like. What that report says is that rand for rand, if you had to compare a worker from South Korea and a worker from South Africa, rand for rand, the South African worker gets lesser disposable income than the South Korea. The explanation is cost of transport. In South Africa, that cost of transport is affected by two things: the spatial dimension, and secondly, the cost of transport. And this investment critical deals with that challenge for poor communities in our areas. I don't know, when somebody said it's not, this budget is not pro-poor, what do you mean? This allocation will also allow PRASA to maximum the potential of the 241 new trains delivered through the rolling stock renewal program. Despite the progress made, PRASA procurement system needs strengthening. The management of the unit of the entity has already instituted measures to strengthen their procurement weaknesses. This includes getting support from the National Treasury to build capacity and mitigate risks, and undertaking live audits for larger procurement projects. In the water sector, we're investing in several large-scale dam projects that are ramping up or entering construction. The Mkomazi project is expected to commence construction in November 2027, transferring water into the Mngeni water supply system. This will increase the total capacity of the system to 5 million households in eThekwini and 4 district municipalities in KwaZulu-Natal. The Bergville augmentation scheme is expected to start in July 2026. The project will improve the Western Cape's water supply system, improving regional water security while reliably supplying domestic, agricultural, and industrial water users. To further accelerate infrastructure delivery and effectiveness, we are continuing reforms to facilitate greater private sector participation, capital budget reform, and alternative infrastructure financing. The new regulations for public-private partnerships have been finalized and will take effect on the 1st of June 2025. The regulation reduces procedural complexity of undertaking PPPs, create capacity to support and manage PPPs, create clear rules for managing unsolicited bids, and strengthen fiscal risk governance. The regulation also makes provision for national department to establish sector-specific PPP units. These units will drive private sector participation, creating opportunities to optimize the balance sheets of financial distressed state-owned companies. The Department of Transport and Transnet will engage the market on PSP projects in the following areas: the iron ore, chrome, coal, and manganese lines, expansion and automation of the ferrochrome and magnetite terminal at the port of Richards Bay, the container and automotive sectors, including the potential designation of the South African container port system as a regional transshipment hub for major shipping lines, and establishment of independent rolling stock leasing company. Should Transnet require gap funding for its PSP project, the budget facility for infrastructure will consider these after proper packaging and financial structuring. Additional guarantees may also be considered to finance the entity's maturing debt as well as its capital investment program. In the energy sector, the independent transmission program will be launched later this year. A request for information for a multi-line transmission packaging will also be issued by the Independent Power Producer Office in July this year, followed by a request for proposal in November. This will enable the private sector to play a key role in the expansion of the transmission network. Madam Speaker, we have reconfigured the BFI, the budget for infrastructure facility, to run multiple bid windows instead of just one annual window. Earlier this week, we published a call for proposal under the new system. The first window is now open and will close mid-April. The next window will open soon thereafter. Financing decisions to determine the appropriate fiscal mechanism to support projects have also been separated from the evaluation and budget processes. This will facilitate the mobilization of significant private finance and improve allocative efficiency in fiscal support. This includes financing for proposals approved during the special window last year. Lastly, our efforts to diversify the financing structure to support infrastructure are taking shape. A credit guarantee vehicle to mobilize private sector capital by de-risking projects will be launched in 2026. Its initial focus will be on independent transmission, aimed at bridging the energy transmission deficit. Once the vehicle has demonstrated its efficacy, it will be broadened to include other sectors. Government will issue its first infrastructure bond in 25-26. We will also introduce other innovative financing instruments to diversify the infrastructure fund sources. Financial institutions, including pension funds, banks, development banks, and international financial institutions, have already expressed interest in participating. This, Madam Speaker, is how we plan to leverage infrastructure investment to ease supply-side constraints to the economy and improve access to social services the people get. Madam Speaker, there are several persistent spending pressures in health, education, transport, and security. These have to do with the government properly fulfilling its service delivery mandate. After careful consideration, the government has decided to fund these. Deferring the funding of these sectors further would compromise the government's ability to meet its constitutional obligation to those people. To raise the revenue needed, the government proposes to increase the VAT rate by 0.5 percentage point in 25-26 and by another 0.5 percentage point in the following year. This will bring the VAT rate to 16% by 26-27. Let me pause for a moment. Let me pause for a moment and say,
Order, honorable members. Let's allow the minister to finish his presentation.
Madam Speaker, should the spending reviews and other measures we're embarking on yield enough extra revenue, we will reassess the need to embark on the second 0.5 percentage point increase to VAT. Government also proposes no inflationary adjustment to personal income tax brackets and medical tax credits. These measures will raise 28 billion in additional revenue in 25-26 and 14.5 billion in 26-27. Madam Speaker, this decision was not taken lightly. I can tell you now, no Minister of Finance is ever happy to increase taxes. We are aware of the fact that a lower overall burden of tax can help to increase investment and job creation, and also unlock household spending power. We, however, have had to balance this knowledge against the very real and pressing service delivery needs that are vital to our developmental goals, and we cannot be further postponed. Honourable members, we thoroughly examined alternative raising the VAT rate. We weighed the policy trade-offs involved in increasing the corporate and personal income taxes. Increasing the corporate and personal income taxes would generate less revenue while potentially harming investment, job creation, and economic growth. Corporate tax collections have declined over the last few years, an indication of falling profits and a trading environment worsened by the logistic constraint and rising electricity cost. Furthermore, South Africa's corporate income tax collections are already higher than most of our peer countries. On the other hand, an increase to the personal income tax rate would reduce taxpayers' incentive to work and save. Our top personal income tax rate and our personal income tax collection as a percentage of GDP are far higher than those of the most developing countries. Increasing it is therefore not feasible. Taking on additional debt to meet the spending pressures was also not feasible. The amount is simply too large. The cost of borrowing would be unaffordable. Our sub-investment credit rating would also make this level of borrowing costlier and put us at a risk of even further downgrowth. Madam Speaker, VAT is a tax that affects everyone. By opting for a marginal increase to VAT, its distributional effect and impact were costly considered. The increase is also the most effective way to avoid further spending cuts and to enable us to extend the social wage. The government is very aware of the cost of living pressures faced by households, including higher food and fuel prices and rising electricity and transport costs. This is why we are taking concrete steps to protect vulnerable households. This is done through providing social grant increases that are above inflation, expanding the basket of zero-rated items to include vegetables, dairy liquid, blends, meats and poultry products. We are also not increasing the fuel levy for another year, saving consumers around 4 billion. Madam Speaker, broadening the tax base and improving the administrative efficiency of the South African Revenue Service allow us over time to spread the tax burden more evenly and equitably. With this in mind, SARS is allocated 3.5 billion in the current financial year and an additional 4.4 billion over the medium term. That takes the total SARS allocation to 7.5 billion over the medium term. By the end of February this year, SARS reported a significant increase in undisputed debt. This means billions of rand are owed to the state. The revenue collector has also detected 156,000 taxpayers who are not registered and who have not filed despite their substantial economic activity. We therefore call on all South Africans to comply with the law and support SARS in its endeavor to collect the revenue that enables government to fund and provide critical services. I also want to emphasize the importance of tax compliance. I thank all compliant taxpayers who pay their fair share of taxes. I also encourage those that are not compliant to do the right thing. The rewards of higher tax compliance and efficiency take time Once again, the investment we make today in SARS will allow us to collect at the time to make improvements. Madam Speaker, the revenue proposed through the tax measures announced in this budget will contribute largely to us providing 232.6 billion in additional funding to key programs over the medium term. This amounts to 102 billion in 25-26, 68 billion in 26-27, 62 billion in 27-28. The funding is for spending pressures for infrastructure investment, social protection, a higher than anticipated public service wage bill, a provisional allocation for critical frontline services. Honourable members, in the last year alone, public sector health system lost close to 9,000 health workers. We did not have enough money to retain or replace them, even after reprioritizing funds budgeted for consumables and medicine. Accruals in this sector, which is the money owed by department to vendors for service already provided, also ballooned to 22 million. Let me just dramatize this thing. How it works is that in a Department of Health in a province, they you provide services. The Department of Health does not have money to pay you now. They are going to wait for April. In April, they pay you with new money for the previous year. The second year, in 25-26, they don't have money to pay for the new ones. So it can't be allowed to go on like that. It can't be allowed to go like that. Will be any responsible government if we allow such things to happen. And as a result, therefore, our health services are becoming dysfunctional. This means that the money allocated to departments ends up paying for previous year services and goods rather than for the current needs, setting off a vicious cycle of budget shortfalls, unpaid invoices, and a crisis in cash flow and the planning and the predictability of budgets. This is an untenable situation that we could not leave unresolved. As a result, consolidated spending, which exclude interest payment, increases from 2.4 trillion in 24-25 to 2.83 trillion in 27-28. Provinces will receive 2.4 trillion over the medium-term period. This budget includes allocation to support critical provincial functions related to health and education. We trust that the allocation will be used for their intended purposes. I must repeat, because these funds that are allocated to provinces go through what is called an equitable share. Once they become part of the equitable share, the decision to divide that money and allocate becomes a provincial one. And the provincial government is at liberty to use it in any manner it decides. And the final product is the loss of capacity in health services. The local government equitable share will increase from 99.5 billion in 24-25 to 115.7 billion in 27-28. This is to fund increases in the cost of bulk water and electricity costs provided for free to needy households. In 25-26, 83% of the local government equipment share provides free basic services package for R610 per month to 11.2 million poor households. Honourable members, this package of free municipality services continues to be a key tool for reducing poverty and inequality, raising living standards and facilitating access to a greater economic opportunity. Madam Speaker, a 3-year wage agreement has been reached, although the agreement exceeds the 2024 budget. In the medium-term budget policy statement projections, its duration reduces uncertainty in the budget planning. This agreement will cost an additional 7.3 billion in 25-26, 7.8 in 26-27, and 8.2 billion in 27-28. These are the companies that are outside matching for me. An amount of 11 billion rand provisionally allocated for the next 2 fiscal years for the early retirement initiative, whose intention is to attract younger employees into the public service. Preliminary savings are expected to average 7.1 billion per year over the medium term, long term. The savings will be retained by the departments. The interventions on the wage bill are aimed at ensuring that when key frontline staff are lost through natural attrition and retirement, sectors are able to fill vacant posts to keep service running effectively. Paying salaries constitutes 76% of the provincial education department. This means that only 24 rand out of every 100 rand of their budget is left for funding school infrastructure, meals for learners from poor backgrounds, and stationery and textbook, among other things. Our learner-teacher ratios remain higher than we would like, meaning that we still need more teachers in classroom. To prevent compensation of employees from crowding out other equally important areas of spending, 19.1 billion is added over the medium term to keep approximately 11,000 teachers in the classroom. The foundation to building in the next generation of citizens who contribute economically and socially to this great nation is in its early childhood development. Despite this, the subsidy for early childhood development has not increased from 2019 level of 17 rand per day per child. To remedy this, an amount of 10 billion over the medium term is allocated to increase subsidy to 24 rand per day per child. The extra funding will also support increased access to ECD for approximately 700,000 more children up to the age of 4 years old. Health spending will grow from 277 billion in 24-25 to 329 billion in 27-28 to support equitable provision of public health services, including free primary health care services. Like in provincial education, a significant portion of provincial health budget is spent on salaries and wages. 28.9 billion is added to the health budget, mainly to keep about 9,300 healthcare workers in our hospitals and clinics. It's also be used to employ the 800 post-community service doctors and to ensure that our pharmacists do not run out of medicine. Honorable members, social grants are allocated 284.7 billion rand in 25-26. This allows us to increase the old age grant, disability grant by 130 rand. Now let me tell you a story. I was working here in Waterfront. An old man comes to me and he says, "Thanks for the 150, but the 150 now is gone." He said, "But I don't need VAT." Now, because of the reduction in the VAT, I had to reduce the 150 to 130. The child support grant by 30 rand. The foster care grant by 70 rand. The COVID-19 social relief in its current form will be extended by a year to March 2026. 35.52 billion rand is allocated for this purpose. Let me correct a myth here. A myth that suggests that I'm trying to pose as two alternatives is either VAT or SRD. Didn't say that. What I did say is that the SRD has been a temporary grant. We have been debating to find a funding source for it so that it should not continue to crowd other spending. What we are attempting to do is to stabilize exactly that, to make sure that this grant is not only sustained, but it also does not crowd out other spending. We go on in this speech and in the previous one that leaked. Same sentence. As announced by the President in the State of the National Address, the SRD will be used as a basis for the introduction of sustainable form of income support for unemployed people. The future form and nature of the SRD will be informed by the outcome of the review of the active labor market policy programs. This is expected to be completed by September 2025. Madam Speaker, nearly 28 million beneficiaries will access social grants. The truth is that it is one of the most comprehensive social safety nets among emerging economies. This reflects our commitment to addressing poverty and inequality while keeping our spending sustainable. In this budget, we have also made a provision to replenish the funding for our security functions and peacekeeping commitments. 9.4 billion is allocated to fund the Defence Force and correctional services. Over the medium term, 5 billion has been allocated to the Department of Defense to support South Africa's participation in the SADC mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo and to supplement existing peacekeeping activities. We will continue working with the Department of Defense on ways to change the composition of expenditure to modernize the defense force moving forward. Madam Speaker, combating financial crimes and corruption is essential to protecting the integrity of our economy and the institutions that foster stability and social well-being. Funds are allocated for enhancing the financial forensic and accounting capabilities in our law enforcement institutions, further strengthening our ability to detect and prosecute complex economic crimes. These efforts address recommendations from the Financial Action Task Force and the State Capital Commission, ensuring that we continue to fight money laundering and the financing of terrorism with urgency and precision. There are remaining issues that require work during the year, which may require funding later in the year. These include infrastructure projects in the BFI, the rolling stock fleet renewal program, accommodating population changes that impact on provincial equitable share, in particular the 3 provinces, strengthening capability in the Office of the Chief Justice, Statistics South Africa and the South African Revenue Service were already attending to it. An issue which has been raised is also the issue of political funding and infrastructure provision for real houses. Madam Speaker, our ability to deliver public service depends on having a competent, capable, and ethical state. Delivering a reliable and sustainable core services is a priority for this government. Our focus must remain on more effective and efficient service delivery and proper combination between personnel expenditure, operating costs, and the maintenance of physical facilities and assets, supported by professional and efficient administration. For over a decade, budgets have been trimmed across the board. While these measures have helped maintain fiscal discipline, they have often been implemented without a thorough interrogation of whether the funds we allocate truly support our national priorities. We must acknowledge that over time, budgets tend to grow incrementally, often carrying forward historical allocations without necessarily reflecting the evolving needs of our country. This approach has led to inefficiencies, misalignment, duplication, and in some cases, the continued funding of programs that do not yield the intended impact. We recognize the urgent need to address this. We are not deaf to the public concerns about wasteful and inefficient expenditure. We know that we must earn the taxpayers' trust every day by spending public money with care and ensuring that every rand collected is spent on its intended purpose. Since 2013, as part of the ongoing evaluation of the operation of government, national treasurers and provincial treasurers have undertaken 240 spending reviews. These reviews range from a number of things such as officer accommodation, fleet management, and so on. However, we have agreed, out of a long discussion with colleagues in government, including the president, that we need to focus on this area of spending reviews. And as such, change the institutional arrangements that we have and locate the spending reviews in the president's office. In that sense, incorporate some of that work to the Operation Vulindlela moving forward. So we are going to give that institutional capability moving forward. The consolidated recommendations of these reviews and other things, including this, as I've indicated, the President has also undertaken to do this, to take this work together with National Treasury. Thank you for this commitment, Mr. President. As the National Treasury, we are ready to take the lead to improve effectiveness and efficiency of spending. We will, together with the President, undertake an audit of ghost workers, starting within in national and provincial departments. Use the ongoing detailed review of labor market activity provision and public employment program to consolidate and rationalize to reduce duplications and improve operational efficiency across more than 100 active labor market programs in over 20 public institutions. The recommendation of this review will also be presented to Cabinet in due course. The entire public employment ecosystem. The aim of this review is Treasury will implement a significant changes to the budget process by reassessing the initial assumptions informing budget allocations with a view to creating room for improving spending. Madam Speaker, these reviews go beyond mere cost-cutting measures. They are allowed to systematically assess whether public expenditure is effectively aligned with the priorities of the government and whether it delivers the best possible value for money and impact for the people of South Africa while keeping us on the path of fiscal sustainability. These initiatives will give impetus to the slow implementation of the recommendation of the spending review. I call on ministers, MECs, DGs, HODs, and every official responsible for public funds to embrace these efforts and play their part. The proliferation of conditional grant has necessitated a review of the conditional grant system to reduce duplication and improve effectiveness of the programs. This project will implement the first phase of the recommendations of the review and include merging conditional grants in the basic education and agricultural sector. Preference-based conditional grants to metropolitan municipalities are also introduced, linked to institutional governance and financial reforms to improve services. Madam Speaker, the incentives in our current disaster management system are skewed towards relief and rehabilitation, when mitigation and readiness to minimize damage is the most cost-effective response. Our municipalities stand at the front line of disaster response yet they are hamstrung by aging infrastructure, bureaucratic fragmentation, and limited access to emergency funds. The priority is to reduce the administrative burden to access emergency funds. Every hour of delay costs lives and livelihoods. Continuous improvements are made to the grant system to incentivize municipalities to access a variety of funding instruments for disasters. These include their own budget, the contingency reserve, conditional grant funding, and insurance. The budget allocates 1.7 billion to respond to future disaster over the medium term, while 4 billion is provisionally allocated to address backlogs recovery efforts for provinces and municipalities. The decline in municipality services is evident across cities. Towns and rural villages highlights the systematic challenges faced by this varying group of municipalities. As outlined by the President in his State of the Nation address, Phase 2 of Operation Vulindlela, the institutional structure of local government will be reviewed through the updating of the white paper of local government. In line with the Constitution, the principle of funds follow functions. The review of local government fiscal framework will examine how to appropriately finance local government relative to their functions and their form. Reforms to the revenue-generating service of local government, namely water and sanitation and electricity and refuse removal, are underway. So, the 8 metropolitan municipalities have met the minimum requirement for participation in the Financial Performance Incentive Grant, the Urban Development Financing Grant. Further allocations in the grant are dependent on municipalities meeting specific targets related sets out in their performance improvement action plans. For 25-26, this includes critical institutional governance and management changes to creating an enabling environment for local term investment infrastructure. By ring-fencing the revenues from these services and running operating surpluses, these business units can generate I'm not saying these units can generate funds for infrastructure improvements to deliver quality services. Madam Speaker, in conclusion, allow me to reiterate that through the policy choices we have made and the carefully targeted allocations we are proposing, the public institutions should be in a better position to continue delivering much-needed services. This budget reflects our collective efforts to chart a path through difficult times to prosperity. It represents a vision of future and realistic assessment of the present, as well as the options available to us right now. This vision can only be achieved by making difficult but considered policy choices, choices that weigh up trade-offs and commit to a way forward. Honourable members, this budget is the product of a combined and careful consideration of the Cabinet of the Government of National Unity. Despite some minor disagreements, I must confess, that has done the difficult and necessary work of assessing the alternatives open to us at the current conjuncture in our growth journey. Honourable members, this budget is also a proposal to you as Parliament that has been democratically elected to represent the aspirations and interests of South Africans by confronting the difficult choices needed to move our country forward. It is in this spirit that I draw to the words of the Pan-African leader Amal Kabar, who advises us, always bear in mind that the people are not fighting for ideas, but for things for ideas, for things in anyone's mind.
Order,
they are
honourable
fighting
members.
to win material benefits, to live better and in peace. and to see their lives go forward to guarantee the future of their children. The policy choices proposed here are about achieving these material benefits. They are about moving South Africa and all South Africans forward into a better, more prosperous and equitable future. Speaker, as I close, allow me to express my deepest gratitude to the President and Deputy President for their counsel, their support, and for their leadership, in particular in this difficult budget. Thank you also to the Deputy Ministers of Finance and the excellent National Treasury team led by the Director General. Thank you to the Commissioner for the South African Revenue Services and the Governor of the South African Reserve Bank for their astute stewardship of these two key institutions. Thank you to my cabinet colleagues, the Ministers' Committee in the Budget, and the Budget Council who share the heavy load of the tough decisions that must make to maintain this sustainability of our public finances. To the Parliamentary Standing Committees of Finance, Appropriation and Public Account, I express my sincere appreciation. And of course, out of this threat, without the support of my wife and my family, it would not have been as easy as, it would have been as difficult as. It was through the support from Mom Chawe that I've been able to withstand all this challenge. Lastly, thank you to South African people who continue to entrust their aspiration to us. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Thank you. Can I allow members to take their seats? Honorable members, order. We have now heard the minister tabling the executive statement, which is a budget. It is tabled here in the House. Now the task is for you as Parliament to then reflect on this budget through the relevant committees. The papers tabled, order. Order, Honorable order. Thank you. Honorable members, order. Order. Honorable members, just ignore the people that are going out. Allow me to address you. You have now heard the budget tabled. Order. Honorable members, you will have your chance to address the media as you go out. But for now, just listen. The budget has been tabled. It is now going to be referred to relevant committees to interact with the budget, which allows you an opportunity as public representatives to engage with this executive statement. And it will then come back for debate in this very House where you will express your views. For now, the House is adjourned and we thank the Minister for the budget. I request members to stand. Order. I request members to stand and wait for the presiding officer and the maids to leave the chamber. That concludes the business of the day.
black and white. And that is what we should avoid at all costs. Unify society. If we want to polarize it, we can polarize it. But the reality is that a budget is not an ANC budget. It's a budget for the country.
All right, thank you so much. Minerals and Petroleum Resources Minister, Kwede Mantashe. I'm going to bring in now Musi Maimane, the leader of BOSA. The minister, the elephant in the room, of course, was the proposal of the VAT hike. Your take on his announcement?
Absolutely, we reject the idea of a VAT hike. I think South Africans are going to be double taxed. It's on VAT, but also on personal tax. You are asking teachers, lawyers, nurses, all citizens to now be paying more tax. What ultimately we need is a growth plan. We are obviously clear about the fact that today there was no prioritization of cutting expenditure so that you can fund growth. Funding growth is about increasing the infrastructure spend, making sure it's efficient. As a committee now that receives the budget, the job that we'll now be doing is making sure that we look at every line item, reduce wasteful expenditure that is not serving the people of this country, and ensure that ultimately all money that is allocated goes towards the people of this country.
All right, thank you so much, Musi Maimane, BOSA leader. We look forward to the debate in the House on the budget. Athol Trolip, the parliamentary leader for Action SA. The tax increase on VAT has always been the debate going into this budget speech. Your take as Action SA on the 1% increase on the VAT?
Look, first of all, I want to talk about the fact that this economy can't grow. The minister himself said it's been stagnating for 10 years. And because of that, we have more and more people on social relief to stretch grant. So that's why this budget can't balance. So nothing mentioned about cutting state-owned enterprises that are redundant and obsolete. There's nothing about cutting the cabinet size. No mention of cutting corruption. The only reason we can't grow this economy is because our country is corrupt. It's perceived to be corrupt. There's no property security, and those are the issues that drive away investment. So we can't attract investment. So regardless of Gwede Mantashe says here about polarizing society, society is already polarized, rich and poor. And there are too many poor people in this country, and the ANC government must take responsibility for the fact that they cannot grow this economy. And they are not prepared to tighten their belt, but they expect everyone else to tighten their thin-waisted belts.
Will you vote for the budget?
Absolutely. It looks like we will not be able to vote for this budget because there's no change, there's no policy reform that makes us believe that they can actually implement what they're saying. And there's also his commitment to funding SARS is positive, but there's a disconnect between what he said there and what's written in the white book. So we'll have to go and scrutinize that properly. And if the two dots can be joined up, we can consider it. But there has to be policy change, and there was no indication of policy change.
All right, thank you so much, Athol Trolip, the parliamentary leader for Action SA. I'm going to swing around now and bring in Dr. John Hlope, the leader of the MK party here in Parliament. Of course, I'm going to just swing around. There's quite a scrum here. Dr. Hlope, firstly, the issues really coming into this budget was always going to be around whether the minister is going to increase VAT. He's announced a 1% increase over the next 2 years. As MK, is that a wise move on his part?
Well, thank you. Good afternoon to viewers at home. We have waited for so long to express our views as the official opposition. In our considered view as the MK party, the minister had a number of options to explore, but the option that the minister chose, in our view, is a wrong one. Increasing VAT by any percentage is disastrous. To increase it by 0.5% this year and next year as well, the people who are going to suffer most are black people. These are the people who pay VAT, and we are going to suffer most.
The question really on your statement, what other options did he have in your view?
There were a number of options. Wealth tax, for example, is very important. There are many tycoons here who should be paying wealth tax. There is no reason why we should not increase wealth tax. The other option is to increase corporate tax. It is a viable option in our view. There are other options. Capacitate SARS and make SARS better able to collect revenue. There are so many people who are getting away with murder who are not paying their tax. That, in our considered view, would generate a lot of revenue. as opposed to increasing VAT by 0.5%, which no doubt will affect so many people, particularly the poorest of the poor. So from that point of view, the budget speech was a huge disappointment.
The minister argues that increasing corporate tax will not raise the necessary revenue that is looking for, and it will also discourage investment. Your take on that argument?
Well, we've heard that before. Wealth tax can be improved, can be increased. There is no way investors will run away because they need to invest in South Africa. We've heard that lies before. So those who threaten to pull out, we know they will not withdraw from South Africa. But that, in our considered view, would generate enough revenue as opposed to going down the VAT route.
Lastly, how will MK vote in relation to the budget? Will you support it or reject it? And secondly, do you think the ANC will muster enough support to be able to pass this budget?
Well, let me speak for the MK party. We will definitely reject the budget in its entirety, particularly as it relates to the VAT increase. As for the ANC, I cannot speak for the ANC. They will decide what to do as a party. I can only speak for our party, which is Umkhonto weSizwe Party, the official opposition party in this country. Whatever happens to the ANC camp, it is none of our making. It is of no interest to us.
So this is not pro-poor budget?
Definitely, in our view, this was a poor budget. There's no question about it.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. John Hlophe, the parliamentary leader of the Umkhonto weSizwe Party here in Parliament. I'm looking around. I see my colleagues are also taking reactions on the floor. I'm going to look for more reactions now here on the into this conversation. Of course, you're quite a busy man in terms of the trade relations between the US and South Africa. The president yesterday in his oral reply session was talking about soon you'll be sending an envoy to the US. Is there an indication when that will happen?
When we are ready, all diplomatic efforts are kept within the limits of ensuring that the relationship between the two countries is maintained as it's mutually beneficial. And South Africa, we see that as still very strategic. And we will continue to engage with all the other trading partners. As you are aware, tomorrow we'll be hosting the European Union to further engage on various issues of trade, issues of foreign direct investment in our country, and many other issues of geopolitical interest to all the role players.
Just in relation to how would you characterize the trade relations with the US at the moment? Are they fragile? Are they existing? Are they non-existing? How would you characterize them?
At this stage, they are still existing. The US is our second biggest trading partner. So the issues that are coming from time to time from the White House have dealt with executive order on a few issues, PEPFAR, aid, and also the issue that of expropriation act, which remains necessary because it's a constitutional imperative to redress the imbalances of the past in our country. It's something that we have to continue to do because it's called upon by the Constitution, and everyone who wants to engage with us knows South Africa's history. And we are glad that the Human Rights Council in Geneva has affirmed this important principle of redress in our country. So redress is important for sustainability, it's important for South Africa's diversity, it's important for everything. And it is it's a constitutional imperative. So we will continue to engage with them in that context, including the European Union and everyone that wants to engage with South Africa.
All right, thank you so much, DIRCO Minister Ronald Lamola. Of course, talking about the relations between South Africa and the USA. I'm going to just quickly bring in here the first DSG of the ANC, Nomvula Mokonyane. Second time lucky, the ANC must be relieved that you at least have been able to table this budget today.
We have to welcome the tabling of the budget, as you say. It is now subjected to parliamentary processes. And what we appreciate are the indicators in the budget around infrastructure spend that is going to contribute towards inclusive growth and creation of new jobs, particularly in the area of transport, in the area of electricity, as well as in water. The second one is on a commitment to create a safety net for the vulnerable groups. We have the increase in terms of the social grant, but as well as the retention of the SRD. And lastly, having listened to the outcry, moving from the initial 2% to where we are, but also with specificities that indicate exactly which areas are going to be affected by VAT.
All right, thank you so much, Nomvula Mokonyane, the first DSG of the ANC. For more reaction now, I cross over to my colleague, Nompu. Part and parcel of the GNU, do you support this budget?
Well, it's difficult not to support the budget. At some point, one has to make a decision that's going to take South Africa forward. Look, we're not happy with some of the proposals, but doing a budget is a difficult balancing act. Like, an increase had to be made somewhere. I mean, we are the ones who proposed the bracket creep where high income tax earners would not be adjusted for inflation, the income tax bracket, so that they effectively pay more tax into the fiscus. One of the issues that we're concerned about is how do you budget for a VAT increase over 2 years if your plan is intending to grow the South African economy? It means there's no confidence in the plan that's being tabled here, because the minister is making a number of projections around economic growth, meaning we are also financing the SARS, which is very important, so that they can be able to collect more revenue. But at the same time, you are also budgeting for a VAT increase next year. It's nonsense. Really, it shouldn't have happened. What we should have done is, as a temporary measure, we say we're increasing VAT by 0.5%, implement the growth strategy, see whether or not we still are going to have a funding gap or a funding shortfall next year, and consider our options. One of the issues for us is that we understand the point which has been made by the minister. Look, it's a difficult one. One example is it's a catch-22 situation. If you increase corporate income tax, you're not incentivizing the private sector to try and invest in the economy in order for you to achieve your growth targets. However, our feeling is that everyone should have been expected to make sacrifices around the table. If you're increasing VAT by 0.5%, you should have considered an increase, even if it's 0.5% in corporate income tax. And for example, even private individuals or personal income taxpayers are going to contribute more to the fiscus. However, we understand why some of the decisions had to be taken, and I think the taste of the pudding will really be in the eating when we start discussing and debating these proposals in budget committees. As I already indicated last time, this is, for all intents and purposes, a proposal until Parliament has passed it.
Are you happy about the items that are now being expanded on the zero-rated items for VAT?
Well, yes, but even that is a proposal in our view. We have to look at the items which could potentially be zero rated. It could not just be a decision of the finance minister and treasury to make those proposals. Secondly, if we're increasing VAT and increasing the number of zero rated items, we need to also look at how is that going to impact your revenue in the future. For example, if you look at their projections, they are saying the measures now will give them about 28 billion rands. But they are saying if you increase VAT by 0.5% next year, they will only be able to make 14.5 billion rands. You need to ask the question, which ones of those zero-rated items might be impacting that, and how we can plug that shortfall in terms of revenue going forward. So it needs to be a very comprehensive discussion that involves everyone around the table. It's great that the minister made a number of proposals, but we also need to bring our own proposals on the table.
Lastly, briefly, so you'll vote in favor of this budget, even with your reservations?
No, of course. We have to take South Africa forward. We are going to vote in support of the budget. However, we'll raise our reservations as usual.
All right, thank you so much. Ngabayomzi Kwangwa, who is the Chief Whip of the United Democratic Movement. The Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, now joins me here as he has conversations with Minister Aaron Motsoaledi. Minister, I'm sure you've had a rough couple of the past weeks. Have you been able to get some sleep? I'm sure you must be feeling some sort of relief now that this budget is being tabled.
Oh, of course, yes. It's stressful, particularly for the officials of the department. I sympathize with them. They do most of the work. I don't.
And then in relation to this 1 percentage point increase over the next 2 years, how did you arrive at that? And some people are still saying that you shouldn't have gone that way.
No. Unless you take a 0.5% in this financial year and a 0.5% in the next financial year, and maybe a 0.5% in the next financial year. That's what I've said. Yes. So, given the fact that people are talking about, is a commitment to fund the projects that I'm talking about, health and education in particular. So you needed some money. And what we did was to do a combination of two things. The 0.5 VAT, we reduce the 2% to 0.5, and then increase, and then did not give a tax relief on income tax.
And just with regards to the opposition parties, they are saying that you should have opted rather for wealth tax or corporate tax. How do you respond to their criticism?
No, problem in these people, it's nice when you don't have the responsibility. Let me just give you an example. If you go into Rustenburg as we speak, Glencoe has closed 7 furnaces, and the impact on 13,000 employment. Now, if you were saying you are going to fast-track that process of retrenchment by increasing more corporate tax, what do you mean? You're just putting more people on 350. That's basically what you mean. So I don't think it's logical. South African companies are affected by high electricity, weak logistics, and now you're saying let's put more tax on them. It's high unemployment.
You'll be tabling the recommendations of the consolidated spending reviews to Cabinet in the next month. What can we expect to come out of that?
There are spending reviews, but the colleagues, which we want to concede, that spending reviews that have been done. But with the president, we've agreed, let's accommodate colleagues that says, let's do new comprehensive one. We will use the existing one, but do new comprehensive spending reviews with the hope that will generate some savings.
All right, Minister, before I let you go, are you still angry at the SARS commissioner?
No, he's my friend.
You are on the same page now?
We're on the same page. I don't know, we've met how many times over, about 5 times over this, from the 19th to today.
All right, thank you so much, Minister Enoch Godongwana. For just being naughty there, I'm going to bring in SARS Commissioner Edward Kiswita. Sir, coming into this budget, of course, you had called for a bolstering of SARS to be able to get all those people who are not complying with tax. Has the minister gone enough in terms of giving you that capacity to ensure that you collect this tax that is uncollectible at the moment?
Look, of course, we will continue to make that call for the investment of SARS because that's our conviction. A lot has been made in the media of the 800 billion that is uncollected. Let me just explain what that is. A significant amount of that, about 45% of that, is what we call uncollected debt and outstanding returns. And these are debt that may or may not be in dispute. The most significant part is not in dispute, but taxpayers are just not paying it. And in order to get that, SARS has all kinds of legal instruments, from a friendly phone call to taking out a civil judgment, to attaching assets, to appointing third-party agencies to collect the debt. But all of this requires work. You may recall that last year we announced that we had resolved over 2 million such cases and collected an additional 91 billion from that. That work we want to step up, because there's a significant amount of work in outstanding returns and in terms of outstanding debt. So the 2 million that the minister has, 2 million of the money that we have been allocated will be focused on driving a debt recovery program for SARS, and based on our past successes, we know that that will add a significant positive yield into the fiscus.
The minister talks about 156,000 people who ought to be paying tax but are not. How are we going to get that number down?
So that's not 156,000. That's a fraction of the number of people who don't tax. So what we have done, using artificial intelligence, we do predictive modeling. What it allows us to do is to detect people in the economy who are economically active. We then correlate that to our tax register, and then we discover that they are not registered, or historically they've not been required to file. And yet you see, because at some stage we may have taken the current status of a taxpayer and they would have been below the filing obligation that we have set. But 10 years later, they have improved their position, and then when you see the assets that they have, maybe the luxury cars or the houses that they own, you say there must be something wrong here. And then we drill down into that, and we have discovered over 30,000 individuals who have economic activity but not registered, and the 156,000 you have mentioned who ought to be filing but are not. And that's the power of data and artificial intelligence. It allows us to collect the dots and then to connect the dots and to find people who consciously and wittingly break the law.
Go after them. SARS Commissioner Edward Kiswita, I wish you all the best in your work in terms of SARS collections. For more reaction, we cross back to my colleague Abra.
Bulelani, thank you very much. With me again, I have Brett Hayden of Good. Mr. Hayden, earlier we spoke about bread and butter issues. How pro-poor this speech?
Well, look, the increase in VAT is going to have an effect on everybody, and that disproportionately affects poor households. So there is going to be an impact on poorer households with this VAT increase. The VAT increase is not as large as was proposed in February, and there is an increase in the number of VAT exempt items. But there is going to be an impact. But overall, the balancing act that the minister achieved is encouraging to the extent that we are avoiding an austerity budget. And our fear was that, or our concern was that, in order to balance this budget, he would engage in large-scale cutting of programs and expenditure. But the expenditure that was important for South Africans and to address economic growth and poverty protection and alleviation remain in the budget. So the increase in the social grants, the retention of the social relief of distress grant, and the transition into some other form of social security, the investment in education so that we can protect the number of teachers and protect teacher jobs, the investment in health, The investment in the rail system is absolutely crucial if we're going to achieve the economic growth. So it was a balancing act of keeping the expenditure in the budget, not cutting it, and there is pain for all South Africans, and unfortunately disproportionately for poor South Africans in this increase from 15% to 15.5%.
So would you say the Minister did the best with what he has?
I think the Minister did the best with what was available in the short period of time. The lesson to be learned is that we need a longer runway of time in order to make these fundamental changes that will free up much more funding for projects and also eliminate waste and introduce new tax measures. And so the Minister's commitment and the President's commitment that he referred to of creating a team that will look at each department's budget and eliminate those projects and programs that are not efficient and not having an impact is welcome. You know that Good has been calling for allocative efficiency all along, so that's a welcome step, and we should start seeing the benefits of that in the next budget. So I think the Minister did the best that he could within the short space of time. It's unfortunate that VAT goes up 15% to 15.5%, but the protection of the expenditure is crucial, and we are very relieved that that has been retained.
Thank you so much for your time. Please just bear with me. Okay, fine. I have another guest over here, Matthew Parks of COSATU. Let me just ask you, how does COSATU feel about what the Minister announced today?
Look, we're disappointed by the VAT increase for the next 2 years. Also not adjusting personal income tax for low income, for middle income workers. That's going to make life more difficult for people who are already drowning in debt, who are struggling to survive with the cost of living, whose wages don't keep pace with inflation. We thought it is unnecessary. There's other alternatives that we had given towards capacitating SARS, to reducing tax loopholes that wealthy, rich companies exploit. But there are good things in the budget too. There's significant infrastructure investments, expanding public employment programs, filling frontline vacancies for nurses, for teachers, for police officers, for doctors. There's measures to kind of protect social grant recipients with a 9.4% increase in the social grants. There's a fuel price relief as well. So there are good things, but all of those good things, which are very good, are going to be lost in the VAT hike. And it's impossible to put perfume on a VAT hike when society is struggling to cope with the cost of living, when society just feels exhausted by corruption, by mismanagement. So that for us is unnecessary, but we hope that in the next week or 2 weeks at Parliament that there'll be some sobriety, people can review these things. We hope we'll take our proposals to government and to Parliament and say, let's look at alternatives to increasing taxes upon the poor.
I was going to ask you about the next 2 weeks. Politically speaking, I mean, how do you think this is going to play out?
Well, right now, Treasury doesn't have the numbers to get this thing through. Other parties have indicated they won't support a VAT hike. We also can't support it, and we think Parliament's got the space, it's got the legislative power to review the budget. The budget is simply a proposal, so we hope that Parliament can make a few amendments, give more support to SARS, look at alternative tax measures besides taxing the poor through VAT or through income tax adjustments, and also to adjust the SAD grant for inflation. Those two things, we think we can have a good budget, but the problem is that those two things are so big, they're going to poison the waters of what otherwise are many good aspects to it.
Matthew, thank you so much for your time. Matthew Parks of COSATU. I am now crossing over to Bulelani.
All right, now joining me is Dr. Wanda Mahlatsi, who is the president of the United African Transformation Organization. He now joins me for reaction of the budget speech. Of course, the elephant in the room was always the issue of the VAT increase, the 1 percentage point increase over the next 2 years. Does it appease your concerns coming into this budget?
No, UAT definitely reject this thing, because this thing is targeted to our people, the poorest of the poorest. Now, if you have 0.5 this year, 0.5 next year, in terms of collection, that gives you 30 billion this year, and it gives you 15 billion next year. It's a total of 45 billion. Are you saying you have a government that is well organized that cannot get that money? If you want that money, you'll get it on the wasteful expenditures. On wasteful expenditure, we spend about 125 billion. If you're a government that said that we will work with this party will bring a different skill, best of the best. Where is this best of the best? This GNU has collapsed. They don't have an agenda. Hence, you see the budget is shaky. So our position is this. We are here to protect the poorest of the poorest. Go and get this money from corporate, big corporate. Let them be the one that pay for this 45 billion.
All right, on the expansion of the zero-rated items on VAT, has it gone enough to bring relief to the poorest of the poor?
That is not an intention. The intention is to make people suffer. The ANC is no longer representing our people. Now with the additional of these other parties, it's worse. So I'm saying no. The effort.
So can I expect you that you will vote against this budget?
Definitely, the UAT will vote against. As long as this thing is punishing our people, the poorest of the poorest, it's a no from UAT, definitely.
Dr. Wanda Mahlatsi speaking passionately. He is, of course, the president of the UAT. For more reaction, I cross back to you, Abra.
I now have another guest with me. I have Mr. Masizole, former Speaker of the Western Cape. Thank you so much for your time. I just want to focus on bread and butter issues and the man on the street and the woman on the street and how this budget impacts on them. Was this a budget that is friendly to people in South Africa who are battling at the moment?
You know, as ACC, we think that this is a budget that becomes an attack on the most vulnerable, the poor and downtrodden. It does not seem to gauge the heart of the economy. The pulse of the economy is saying the economy is not doing well. So you've got to protect and cushion the most vulnerable. With this step that has been taken today by the Minister of Finance, it says that we don't care how poor you are, we don't care how hungry you are, to increase the VAT by 0.5%, which makes it, in fact, to 16%. So when you buy food for 100 rands, you will pay 116 rands in total. And that is a very, very serious indictment on the government that should protect the poor. So the Alliance of Citizens for Change, we're clear that we should protect the poor by increasing the food, the amount of food items that are zero rated. So the minister tried to touch on that, but in a very cosmetic way. We need to increase realistically the amount of food items that are zero rated, but more so parliamentarians must reject this budget increase because it's anti-poor, it's against the spirit that SARS, the very agency that is tasked by the Constitution to collect tax on our behalf, saying we can get more money elsewhere. Don't do it. We have 800 billion rands that we can collect. That's what SARS says. The SARS commissioner who spoke now, just here. So we need to listen more, and government must stop this arrogance of playing as if they are the Mr. Know-it-all. The Minister of Finance is supposed to listen more to specialists. So they give more money to defense, that's fine. But the fact that they were not able to increase the social relief of distress, the 370, we actually believe in this country we need what we call a universal wage subsidy, so that everybody can buy food and sleep in a stomach that has got something. More than 20 million South Africans, they sleep without eating in this country. So we reject this budget. We believe that this is an attack on the poor.
Sir, thank you so much for your time. My colleague Bulelani is also standing by right now.
Well, joining me now is Songezo Zibi, the leader of Rise Mzansi, who's also the chairperson of Scopa. But firstly, let's start here. As leaders of political parties, you met with the president this morning. Take us through the mood of that meeting.
The mood of the meeting is the meeting.
I was expecting you to say that, but...
No, the conversation took place last night. It was cabinet this morning. I'm not in cabinet. But the finance minister presented, in essence, to all of us, what he presented to South Africans today. Because I think it's important that we understand the difficulty of putting a budget out of an economy that has effectively stagnated over the last 10 years. I know that all of us want all sorts of goodies. I wanted money for Transnet so that we can start moving goods between places in South Africa, invest in new rail from Rustenburg to all the way to the ports and so on, so that you can reduce the damage on the roads and that kind of thing. That's one of the things I wanted, for instance. But we're not going to get it, not in the short term. So the finance minister explained to us the challenges that the Treasury has had. But I'm very pleased that he has responded to the complaint against VAT, because 2 percentage points was a lot.
Of course, the issue of value for money is one of the issues that has been talked about. 1 trillion rand for infrastructure. You as a SCOPA chairperson, how are you going to ensure that that money goes to its intended purpose?
I think what's important, and again, this is why the detail is important, there's actually very little money that the core appropriations in the budget is going to be spent on infrastructure, because we don't have the room. Most of that is going to come from the balance sheets of SOCs. It's by SANRAL, it's by Eskom, etc., etc. South Africans need to understand that this is not 2009 anymore. In 2009, President Kgalema Motlanthe and Minister Trevor Manuel announced a 749 billion rand hard cash stimulus into the economy. We don't have that kind of money today, and I think South Africans need to understand that it's very important that we do not lie to them. Therefore, we're counting little pennies here and there, and they're unfortunately not enough. There are two things that are important in this environment. We must always try and cushion the blow on the poor, but it is absolutely important that number of 28 million people that are dependent on social grants reduces over time, because people have a living wage, they've got decent jobs, they've got decent housing, public transport is affordable for them to go to and from work or to go and look for work. So we need to think about budgeting in those terms, not in terms of single issues.
The minister announcing a 20 billion rand saving from the Eskom debt relief. Is that something to celebrate?
It's something to celebrate. We've actually, as a standing committee on public accounts, been engaging very closely on an ongoing basis with Eskom. One of the things Eskom has been absolutely focused on doing is efficiencies, the same efficiencies that we're talking about from government. For example, they are trying to move as much of their volume of coal off the road onto conveyor belts, which are much cheaper. That's got savings in other areas of public spending. You don't damage the roads as much anymore, which means you don't spend so much money on maintenance, having backlog of maintenance and so on. So Eskom has been doing exceptionally well, all the way towards placing a concrete proposal on the table for the eventual writing off of municipal debt if they agree to a certain repayment regime, fixing their own infrastructure and collection and so on. We need to do that with every other entity in government.
Debt service costs for the country remains a headache for the minister. Is he doing the right thing? I mean, is he winning this battle of reducing these debt service costs?
No, he's not. He's not, because Parliament refuses to acknowledge the problem. Parliament refuses to acknowledge the problem. By the end of this financial year, we will be paying close to 500 billion. If we are not careful, 500 billion servicing debt. It's soon going to become the biggest single expenditure item in our national budget. We're talking about SARS collecting money. Most of that money is going to go towards repaying debt if we are not careful. So it is really important that we use public money well. We reduce corruption, we prosecute corrupt people, we eliminate the waste that we see in the system. But most importantly, the board of the South African people that sits here must start acting like a board, and people should not expect goodies when there are none falling from the sky.
Songezo Zibi, leader of Rise Mzansi, I'm going to ask you to step aside for a moment and bring in Vuyo Sungula, the president of the ATM. Of course, the elephant in the room coming into this budget was the proposal of the VAT increase, the 1 percentage point increase over the next 2 years. Does it strike the middle ground?
No, it doesn't, because the real impact when it comes to the poor now need to contend with an increase in electricity prices, fuel prices. We already have high interest rates. We already have a high cost of living. Now, if you add VAT to that mix, you are basically killing South African citizens. The problem, firstly, is that the government refuses to go after big corporates who are making money in South Africa. The amount that is lost through illicit financial flows committed by especially companies in the mining industry, it is very high, but the government does nothing to address that. Secondly, you've got the informal sector whereby foreigners are trading there, not paying any form of taxes, but they're using the infrastructure, using the services, but even the government is not addressing that. Now, if we can go back also to the mining companies, the amount that the mining, the VAT was raised through VAT as opposed to mining royalties. The amount that was raised by VAT was 16 times higher than mining royalties, meaning we've got companies who are not South African-owned companies who are making our economy in terms of our mineral resources, but they are contributing next to nothing. So we have a government, Bolelani, that rather would impoverish many South Africans who are barely surviving instead of finding alternative means of raising revenue.
He argues that increasing corporate tax would discourage investment. Do you buy that argument?
No, we don't buy the argument, because by the time in 1994 came, the tax rate just before apartheid ended, there was it was 50%, and from 1994 it has been going down and down. But how can they be increasing VAT, which will impoverish the South African citizens, but on the corporate side, there's not even an increase. It has been going down since 1994. Also, Bulelani, there's the issue of the irregular and wasteful expenditure. That is above 126 billion on a yearly basis. Why are they not even going there? Because the Auditor General reports are very clear to say this particular department, this particular municipality has lost money in a wasteful and fruitless expenditure. Why are they not going after the real culprits, but they are rather going after poor South African citizens who are barely surviving?
The increases in social grants, are they sufficient in the current economic climate?
They're not even sufficient. The country, Bulelani, has got a lot of money. If you look at the amount of the mineral wealth that we have, if you look at the companies that are operating, milking our country, the biggest problem we have here is a matter of priorities. You have a government that rather wants to play sweetheart with the big companies, but play that tough figure when it comes to
It's not this policy or my policy. That's why I was a little bit objecting when you said Minister of NHI. I know it's in a lighter note, but definitely it's important for people to understand that he has got no choice, he has got to support.
Bring us up to speed with regards to the implementation at the moment.
No, let's take you back to the State of the Nation address and go and read what the President said about health. He mentioned only two things about health. Firstly, our battle against HIV/AIDS, that it needs to come to an end, and that we are going to load an extra 1.1 million people on top of the 5.5 million who are on ARVs. We are going to look for 1.1 million. And we launched that project the very same month the president said. So on the 25th of February, we launched that program. The second thing he said in preparation of implementation of NHI, we are going to go on improving the healthcare system in the form of infrastructure, management, and human resources. And he went on to mention a number of hospitals that are going to be built. He never gave you their names. He just mentioned them. New hospitals, replacement where the others have aged, refurbishment and maintenance, and then also community health centers and clinics. In my budget speech in May, I am going to actually give you the details of that. The minister here mentioned 1 trillion rand for infrastructure. That includes healthcare infrastructure. But obviously you don't expect him to unpack it because it will have taken him the whole afternoon.
How do we improve Helen Joseph Hospital?
Well, the recommendations from the Umbad are very, very clear. He made recommendation to the Department of Health in Gauteng and the Premier's office, and then make recommendations of what the hospital must do. It's very clear and straightforward, and those must be done. My job will be to make sure that they are actually being done. But I also said, it is definitely not only Helen Joseph. So this month, we are going to have a National Health Council where I'm going to unpack, because I've been singing a song about this infrastructure. The reason that the president mentioned infrastructure during the State of the Nation address was not because of Helen Joseph, the results were not yet out. It's because we told him so that we have got a big problem of infrastructure and HR in the healthcare system because of the budget cuts that happened over the years, which the minister today alluded to. I'm sure you heard him. He even gave an example of how healthcare is run in the country.
The US pulled out of giving South Africa the PEPFAR funding. Give us a picture of what are the implications of that for the country.
Well, the implication is that quite a number of services which people were receiving may be cut off, but mostly that the people who are earning from PEPFAR will no longer have salaries. But what we have made sure that must not happen is that anybody who's on ARVs must never stop taking them because they are of not getting them. Anybody who qualifies for ARVs must get them, must never be deprived of them. That is why even with that announcement, on the 25th of February, some 20 days after Trump made the announcement, we went to Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital Hall and announced and launched a program to look for 1.1 million more people who must go on ARVs. So we are going to make sure, and what we have done in terms of the patients who are receiving services from these clinics that have been closed, we are asking the Department of Health in provinces to come and absorb them in public health care services where they will get their help.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, the Health Minister. All the best in your work. I'm going to bring into this conversation now COGTA Minister, as well as IFP Leader Velenkosini Hlabisa. You were sitting in cabinet this morning with the President. How was the mood in that meeting?
Thank you very much, and greetings to SABC viewers. The mood was very good. The GNU, we may even have some different views, but we are matured as leaders and as ministers. We were part of the engagement on the budget. The IFP was against the 2% VAT increase, but the movement through the engagement from 2% to 0.5, which is effectively for 1 year, and if then it happens to the maximum, only 2 years. We support this budget because we feel a budget must be credible. It must demonstrate the source of income. If you pass a budget that does not have credibility, it is a budget that is not good for the country. And secondly, if we decided to borrow this money, it was going to be a burden for generations to pay back that money. So now, a 0.5 VAT increase for 1 year at the minimum or 2 years is better than borrowing. Secondly, the amount of food items to be exempted has been expanded, which is going to be a big relief and a cushion to the poorest of the poor people in South Africa. More money is going to go to infrastructure, education, and health. More job opportunities will be created, better services will be created. Because you see, if you have a budget that does not deliver services, it is as good as not existing. So a good budget should not be a heavy burden. There must be a balance between services and whatever that was put in order to create a revenue source. What is good is that more money was given to SARS because they promised that if they can get the resources, they will collect the 800 billion rand, which is outstanding. Even if they can collect 400 billion rand, it will be a great relief to our country. And lastly, if you look at the budget, more money was given to provinces and municipalities, which will make service delivery better. Because if you have government at a provincial and a local government level that is unable to deliver because they don't have money, it is also not of any help to the people of South Africa. So we support this budget, and we also advanced the view which collectively we accepted, that immediately after this tabling, let us go back to the drawing board and identify more areas where we can reduce the expenditure and also identify areas to concentrate in order to grow the economy, which can speedily remove the 0.5 VAT increase in the second year.
Velenkosini Hlabisa Kokta Minister as well as the IFP leader, but we will hold you to account on that 100 billion rand for equitable share that is additional for municipalities. Hopefully it will go to its intended purpose. All the best in your work, and it's a wrap for us here in the precinct. I'll cross to my colleague Nombu.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. Yes, well, a lot came out of the budget, and of course, the key thing being that 0.5 percentage point increase in VAT for 2025, and then a further 0.5 percentage point increase in 2026, which effectively means that come this time next year, VAT will be 1 percentage point higher at 16%. I do have with me two economists, Hannah Denobrega, she's an economist at Prescient, and Levan Gopal, he's a director at Merchant Africa. Thank you, both of you, for joining us. I'll start with you, Hannah. We were talking about the VAT impact. Of course, National Treasury has tried to bring about more zero-rated products. Do you think, to some extent, this helps to counteract any regressive nature of VAT on poorer households?
So what would make the VAT regressive would be if they had applied it to all goods and services in South Africa. However, they've removed the VAT increase to only be they've removed any basic goods from the VAT increase. So that means that it's not regressive for the poor. It doesn't affect the poor as much as if it had to be based on all goods in South Africa.
Levan, I was quite surprised to see that they've basically said the social relief of distress grant comes to an end come the end of March 2026. I think some 10 million people do claim that money every month, 370 rand. That's 35 billion rand that the government has had to churn out over a number of years, but it comes to an end. And yet, President Ramaphosa has said that this may serve as a precursor towards a basic income grant. So there's a full stop there. What are the implications?
I'm personally very disappointed that that particular grant has come to an end. It's been a feature since COVID, and there are many that have become dependent on this. This has helped to feed families. We look at our economy with the unemployment rate as it sits, north of 30%, some 8 million people without jobs. They are probably the ones that survive on that 370 rand. Let's counterbalance it with VAT, and there was a thinking that the increase in VAT might have been there to come through to afford to pay for that social relief. Well, now that we see 15% going up by 0.5% this year and 0.5% next year, it's likely to add about 15 billion to revenue, which certainly comes through to add value to our revenue, and every cent does count. I believe that more could have been done as well in terms of creating opportunities for youth employment. Programs could have been put in place to come to the rescue of those that are in need the most. Remember, as you remove that social grant, you're going to create hardship in this economy, and giving people 12 months notice is just not good enough. I must also share the R1 billion spend in infrastructure is welcomed, particularly the spend on water and electricity. These are focus areas that we need the spend in. In general, it hasn't been a storied budget. We saw a personal income tax remain flat. We saw corporate tax remain flat. And you also noted the fact that there is going to be a widening budget deficit, and this has been something of a concern. If we've already come to terms with 22 cents out of every R1 going towards payment of debt and other interest aspects of that massive amounts of borrowing, we're likely to see that amount increase going forward, and that for me is a concern.
Hannah, of course, I think, National Treasury has done its best to tinker around the edges, try and raise money where it can and so on. But the big elephant in the room remains growth. There's been a lack of growth. Were you satisfied that there are enough initiatives in play, with the setting up of a PPP mechanism to ensure that the private sector is able to invest? Do you think enough's been done so that we can see growth taking shape going forward?
So in the past, we've seen that COVID was a big roadblock in terms of growth spending. We had to do a lot of spending for social distress grants and just upholding the well-being of the economy. So that was a very big survival technique that we had to do and spend on. Now we're starting to see, it's a few years after COVID, that spending is starting to ease on social distress, and we're really starting to see the fruits of the spending happening in infrastructure. So slowly we can see that Eskom and the electricity production has become a little bit more consistent throughout time, and we're yet to see the fruits of the labor are in the infrastructure in Transnet, and how the competition in private sector is going to actually help us out there, right?
Yes.
So it's really it's a question of a wait and see, and we can already see the ball has started to get rolling. This is really the base of growth going forward. We can't grow our economy and have the bells and whistles before we have the primary ingredient, which is infrastructure, in place.
Levan, in terms of what happens hereafter, these are budget proposals that have been made. The DA has come out straight and said that they're going to oppose the VAT increase. To what extent are you concerned around the survivability of the GNU, given that one could say there's been a lack of compromise on the part of the DA, but of course their arguments are valid that we need to use the resources that we have properly, but in the interim?
I was very pleased when we had the notion of GNU after the elections. I thought this was an opportunity for South Africans to all have a voice, an opportunity for us to guide and grow the nation. Certainly, as if you view it as a marriage, every marriage has its hiccups, and maybe this is one of those. I was also disappointed when we first saw the budget 3 weeks ago, and some parties decided to walk out and not to agree on the terms. There were certainly moments well ahead of the budget where they could have, and so some people might view that as grandstanding on the part of certain political parties, showboating to say that we have the power to stop the budget. I hope, after all is said and done, and this budget, which I believe to be a compromise compared to what was expected 3 weeks ago, I hope that the various parties come together and agree, and that this becomes a feature as our national budget, and we move on without drama.
All Right, well, we wait and see. Of course, those were my guests. Hannah Denobrega, she's an economist at Prescient, and Levan Gopal, he's a director at Merchant Africa, speaking a little bit, just scratching the surface of the budget 2025 that was delivered by Enoch Godongwana, the finance minister. Of course, this is just the beginning now. A legislative process has to be gone through for Parliament to approve the budget, and we understand that should take place in the next couple of months. They've got very little time in which to get this matter sorted out. That is it from us here in the parliamentary precinct, and of course we will continue to give you post-budget analysis and stories from the economics desk. My colleagues have been feverishly working in the lockup that we explained to you, that they sit in for many hours and then generate very comprehensive packages with graphics and speak to all the various issues that matter to South Africans, for businesses, households, etc., etc. That's a wrap from us. It's back to you in studio.